AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Mr. Vasilash.
How you doing, John?
Doing very well, actually. Yeah.
Good,
You
good.
too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. So,
Do you want me to ask you one?
lay it on me, brother.
All right. So today is the 88th anniversary of a low-volume car that is still in production, that is in the collection of the Henry Ford Museum, and it is what I would argue to be the most recognized vehicle in the entire collection.
I'm going to ask you guys to join me on this one.
There's a lot of clues there.
Yeah.
A lot of clues.
By the way, while we're pondering this, let me introduce who we've got on stage, so to speak. We've got Gordon Heidacker from a company called PureForge. You're going to learn what that's all about. And we've got Alan Amici from the Center for Automotive Research in Ann Arbor. And we're going to get into why he's on the show too. But you guys got any idea what the hell Gary's talking about? 88 years old. So that's older than the Corvette.
Yeah.
And it's
still in production.
Still in production. In low volume production. It's still being manufactured.
Galenda wagon, maybe.
No.
Nope.
I don't think they've got one of the Galenda wagons in the Henry Ford.
Not a Henry Ford.
All right, you guys are not going to. You're not going to get this.
Not a Morgan.
The thing.
You're not going to get this.
Okay, we're not.
You're not going to get
no,
this.
You're right.
I'm absolutely.
It's a trick question.
But it's a vehicle. It's in the collection. It's in production. People drive it.
The Wienermobile.
The Wienermobile.
That's that old? I had no idea. It goes back that far.
Yeah, and I mean they've had several iterations of the vehicle, but yeah, and apparently there are 6 Wienermobiles rolling around the country today at any point in time.
So because we got an audience that are not based in the United States, and what Gary's talking about here is there's a meat processing company, I guess you'd call it, Oscar Mayer, and they make hot dogs, wieners, and they've made this vehicle that looks like a big wiener, and everybody in the United States know what the hell this vehicle is.
Sure.
So there you go.
It's a good tidbit.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You can win bar bets with there something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we got a lot to talk about, but let's get into PureForge.
Sure.
What the hell is this company? and so my understanding is you guys got a treatment for brake rotors, or I guess any kind of metal, right? That makes it super
can
strong.
Work on a lot of metals, but right now we're focusing on brake rotors.
Okay.
It does harden the surface, but it's only 4 microns thick. So to start off, let me say this. What I'm about to tell you is so out there. A lot of people would say there's no way that works. So that's what we get a lot of. One of the highest issues we have is believability. And so we said, all right, let's take an approach. And being from an OEM, and Al knows this as well, you want proof, you want data, you want to be able to communicate on a data level. So we've spent the last several years working on accumulating data that allows us to speak at an OE level. So we've taken a higher standard with our aftermarket product. And then we said, all right, we're in low volume production. We are on the scale to try and get to scalability. And how do we get there? But what's really interesting about the technology, and my background is in advanced technologies and development. You can count on one hand the number of times you find a technology just kind of free floating in the wild that actually is disruptive. And we basically came across this thing. They were looking for somebody to take the company, which was in San Diego, more of a med tech kind of company doing batch processing with this unique metallurgical kind of treatment, which basically combined with a brake pad material makes brake rotors last. Now, wait for it, 200,000 miles, which is just outstanding. Now, it can work on other metals. It can work in other metal conditions. We probably went down the rabbit hole of 100 different applications we could put it on. But there's been an investment by stockholders to do this a certain way, and we're now trying to deliver on that promise on the first product, which is brake rotors.
So you're taking a brake rotor, it's manufactured.
Correct.
You guys are not building the rotor.
We don't build the rotor.
So they send it to you.
We specify the rotor.
Okay. So is it a PVD, CVD?
It's a PVD process. So
okay.
great, kind of intro into that.
Explain that to the rest of us. What's that mean?
Physical vapor deposition.
Perfect. And what we do is we put a variety of materials and gases, and if you may be familiar with PVD when they did like chrome cladding, right? You put a positive charge on one, a negative on the metal, and you put it into a vacuum chamber. It gets attracted to the other part, and then it distributes on a molecular level. We're doing a very similar thing, but at a much higher matrix kind of level. Our CTO is more worried about atoms and things spinning in the right orientation on top of each other than he is about creating chrome. So it's
How
very
scalable is it?
very scalable. It's like anything else. It's time, money, and effort, right? So when you start out with, can it be done? Secondly, can you do it and make a business case, which we have? And then can you scale it so that it becomes high volume production? So we're in that interim phase. It's not unlike when I was at Daimler working in research, particularly on electrical. We would take things and we'd put it on the S-Class first. And usually the S-Class could give you at least a payback on your initial investment at some high level. Then you'd move it down to an E-Class, and you'd move it down to a C and a B and an A, and eventually Chrysler would get it, right? Many years later, at least that's the way the plan was supposed to work. But
Plymouth.
Yeah, right. And so we tongue in cheek there a little bit, but we did do a lot of that kind of work. And so we had to get this technology scalable to a level where it would make sense in a particular area and have a good payback. And so where we're targeting right now is fleets. So the payback just on a basis of, okay, I'm a fleet operator, I run through brakes. I run through brakes all the time. We had one fleet come to us. This is kind of amazing because it was on Mercedes Metris van doing last mile delivery, 3,000 miles, metal to metal, brake wear out, right? So they were overloading them. It was horrible. They came to us and said, well, what can you do? We said, well, why don't you try us out? So we went to 3 Metris vans almost 3 years ago. We're still running on the same 3 sets of brake rotors with 0 wear on the rotor.
What's it do to brake pads? Does it increase their longevity at all?
It does. Now, the wear is related to stops. And on these vehicles, short distance, last mile, I hate to say this, but brake pedals are more an on-off switch than any modulation between that. You've seen UPS drivers and postal service drivers, and I mean, they're on the pedal, both of them, right, on-off. So the pedals, when you have a lot of brakes stops, you'll wear the pads out, but we still go 3 to 5x normal pad wear on that scenario. In one case, we did a Ford F-150 in San Diego, 170,000 miles, both pads and rotors still going strong. Original. Well, with our treatment.
Yeah.
Treatment
That right.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, so the only reason that I know about PVD is that at one point in my career, I wrote about metal cutting extensively. Okay. And so PVD coatings were put on inserts for machining. And so whether it was Sandvik or Kennametal or any of these other companies, the big argument was that these inserts were more expensive than things that were just coated otherwise, but you would be able to stay in the cut longer. Okay, so you'd be more productive. So this fleet application makes like huge sense because it's the same sort of thing, right? You're keeping your truck in operation longer because you're not having it in service. The question I have is, what about John's car? Probably not a good example because he probably uses brakes like mad and just
it'd probably be a great
driver.
example.
But I mean, so what about the natural consumer? I mean, how does this play into that, or doesn't it?
Well, it does, but there's a morphology that goes along with this, right? So cost is one, but what are some of the other unintended benefits that we get out of this? So if you look at EU7, right, which is this whole brake dust conundrum that we're chasing in Europe. Well, ironically, we've all done this, right? On an old car, we drive it. We only drive it nice days, but we end up having to clean the wheels because of brake dust, right? My Viper used to get brake dust all the way down the side because it would attract the dust, as you were driving it. And I only washed the car because it got dirty from a variety of either road dirt or brake dust or both. Our rotor doesn't wear. So the brake dust that is attracted to your car that you have to actually physically dislodge to get off doesn't occur, and therefore your cars stay clean, your wheels stay clean. If you've got a high-end car, you're not going to be cleaning your wheels on a regular basis. And I actually brought my Viper here today. When we're done with the show, you can take a look at it. I've got a set of these brakes and rotors on there. We cleaned the Brembo calipers, clean them nice and clean. You can put your finger on it and you're not going to get them dirty. And I've got, 1,000 miles on them since I put them on. We find that the unintended benefit is that we get zero rotor wear. Therefore, we are not contributing to the dust. And as you know, the wheels, when they're turning, they're always in contact one way or the other with the pads, and they're always creating dust, whether you're using them or not. The other thing is that the morphology of the pad is that it's got a low contact point, so it just kind of falls off as it wears. And so you don't see that on the side of your car generally. So we found that we did a rotor test on the EU7 protocol in Europe last year with Link, and our result was, gee, your rotor has unlimited life. And I said, well, that's pretty good coming from a third-party source. We just did some really, really neat testing on our rotors and our pads, our pad formula. And this also turned people around because now we have data. Now, I don't know if you remember Paul Stoloff. Paul Stoloff has joined us. He came in and he said to me, and I think to Dave Sherman and a couple of other guys, there's no way this works, but I really want to understand what you think you have. His push was towards data. Well, we did this test at Link, which is a pad wear data test. It's an FMVSS test. Ironically, our rotor after the test gained 13 grams.
So?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The reality is the pad and the rotor create a kind of a handshake. And the pad creates this protective transfer layer. And when you're braking, you're actually braking pad against pad. We call it adherent friction. It loves heat. And we have a bunch of tests that we've done, but it showed that of an OE pad, we see this significant wear. We're 3 to 5 times less, but a portion of that pad wear is established at the beginning to establish that protective layer on the rotor. Therefore, we stay stable regardless of the heat. The OEs have higher wear in higher heat. And we were at PRI last year. We showed some of our heat to heat at 550 degrees C, and a racing company came up and said, how are you doing that? So we just treated rotors for them on a...
That was one of my questions. What
Yeah.
about the racing community, especially the long distance?
Right,
sports
24 hours of something.
Right.
Right. If you don't have to change brakes, you probably win, regardless of what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, well, we haven't tested that yet. So I'm not going to go out there and say I can win a race just because of my brakes. But that's something we do want to test. So we're on race cars. We're doing vintage Indy. We're doing some formula car work and vintage formula. We are doing some stuff right now. We signed a contract with M1 Concourse. We've got some cars running out there. Some Mustang GTs that are doing particularly well. And we're doing some stuff on road cars. We're doing a variety of things on fleets. And we've got a bunch of customer orders from, police fleets right now, police and emergency vehicles.
How much are rotors a problem from a warranty standpoint for automakers?
Well, it depends on the issue. So my Dodge Ram, I have a 2019. And we had a situation on my Ram before I even joined this company where I had a reverse groan issue where the harmonics of the, say, early morning wet brakes scenario would vibrate through the cab. And I'd, put up with it, and then I'd put it in gear and I'd go. And after a while, I'd say, this is terrible. And then there was a TSB that came out, Technical Service Bulletin. And we said, okay, this is horrible. I took it to the dealer. They put new brakes on. Well, I think 2 days later, I had the same groan. So we put our brakes on when I took over, and no groan. So I think we have some situations where we can do some things. We just actually had an interesting thing with the Tahoe Police Brembo package, where we did a brake pad and rotor solution for the Rapid City, South Dakota Police Department, where they were having a lot of noise. And there's a TSB out on that one as well. And after 5,500 miles, we have no noise and we have no wear. So we've been working with Rapid City, South Dakota for a while. And now they're outfitting all of their police cars with what we have.
So why would they have this problem there and the Farmington Hills Police apparently doesn't have that problem?
I think it's across the country, the Tahoe issue right now. I think the Technical Service Bulletin is across the country. It's not in a particular area. We just happen to have some relationships with the South Dakota folks that we said, all right, let's let's try it there.
Who makes foundation brakes anymore? Who makes rotors?
Well, you've got your traditional guys, but then you've got other manufacturers. One of the manufacturers we're partnered with is Wapaka. Wapaka is out of Wisconsin. And when I first came on as CEO, one of the first things we did, we traveled out to Wapaka, and I said, I'm not leaving until I have an agreement with these guys. Because one of the things is supply, right? An old purchasing guy, you need supply. So we went out and said, let's get a collaborative agreement with Wapaka. We're still working with them today. They make rotors for a variety of OEMs and the aftermarket. And so they're a source in the US. But then you've got a lot of things in China that are coming in right now. And you know, look, when I was a kid working at a gas station and you had a car come in that needed brakes, you'd either turn the rotors on the car or you'd turn the rotors off the car. If there was still meat left, you'd put new pads on and go. With the cheapness of rotors coming from China today, it doesn't make sense, right? You just
Don't even turn the rotors?
Don't even turn the rotors. Throw them away, put a new set on.
Wow.
You know, so it's been very interesting for us as we've been getting into this. The paradigm shift on, say, throwaway product, throwaway parts has been, I think, prevalent with cheaper stuff coming into the marketplace.
So is it possible you could take a cheap base rotor, coat it, and suddenly it's a really good rotor?
Yes. The metallurgy, short of large inclusions and pockmarks, yeah, we can take almost any cast iron surface and we create a homogeneous surface on that rotor, which one of the things that's really interesting, and one of the things that I think Stoloff told us, was we think we have a process that eliminates DTV, which is disc thickness variation. And when you have that, if you guys have ever stomped on your brakes in a panic stop and you get that shudder going through your steering column, that's usually, people equate it to warped rotors, but it's really disc thickness variation that causes that. So we don't have that wear. And yeah, it really, we've tried it on Chinese rotors, we've tried them on rotors from India, we've tried them on rotors from Turkey, we've tried them on rotors from the US.
So if you had a really good rotor
Mm-hmm.
and coated it, would it be any different than a really not good rotor that's been coated?
I would hesitate to say that there's much of a difference other than where we start to push the extremes, right? So one of the things we haven't tested yet, and we all love this, if you can get rid of rotational unsprung mass, what happens if, and this is just a question because we haven't put the money into it, but what happens if you take a really good quality rotor, make it thinner to the minimum, then treat it since there's no wear? How much can you get out of a rotor? Well, we did that on one that we're currently engaged with Hyundai, and we just did a calculation. Actually, Paul did it. It's 1.2 pounds per rotor of unsprung rotational mass. That's pretty effective to get that out of a car. It's almost 5 pounds a car.
Right. Everybody's fighting weight these days, but especially if you take out unsprung weight, at least amongst performance cars, that's gold.
Well, on one of the race cars, we did there's an integral, this is the 64 Heidacker that we have in the shop. We took an integral hub and rotor assembly. We lightweighted it by going to a two-piece design with our friction disc. We took 4.5 pounds out of each corner on a 900-pound car. That's pretty substantial. It'll change the suspension setup.
So how would you do this? Rotors get cast, they get machined, and then what? You would zap the surface of the rotor?
We call it atomic forging, but
Okay.
zapping works as well.
Isn't it just putting it in a big container and waiting till it's done?
The current machine, a couple of our guys said it's kind of like, if you saw the movie The Fly and the guy walked into that machine. That machine is kind of what our machine looks like. You just don't want to go in there. But yeah, it's right now we're in a batch process, right? And that's where we're getting our current economics from. If we get something different, we've got some machine designs that will make it a little bit more efficient and effective.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to take a really good top of the line rotor right now, what would it cost in comparison to what one you could sell that would be comparable or better than this?
So right now, we have had set pricing because we're actually in production. We're launching the brand in October with 36 direct fit applications that kind of permeate out to about 1,000 different vehicle applications. We'll have those in stock. So we're launching in October this new brand, PureForge, Atomic Forge rotors, and we will have them in stock so you can order them. The cost today, and again, just very specifically, is about, just for the treatment, is about $128, $128.50 wholesale per rotor. On a cost basis, if you're talking about an OEM cost, and we were having to cut our margins down, this is an aftermarket margin, we can get down much lower. And with scalability, we can continue to push that down to something that's highly repeatable. Again, it just takes money and investment to get there. We've got all the different paths kind of figured out on what we would do, but there's a variety of things we do prior to the rotor coming in. There's a variety of things we do the rotor on the way out the door to make sure we ensure quality and that we have all of our quality steps in place. And we have some processing that we do that makes our treatment process unique that we don't share with everybody. So there are certain things you have to do prior to getting the rotor in the machine to condition the rotor to accept that surface treatment adjustment or modification.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the secret sauce.
So what if the guy goes to AutoZone or O'Reilly's or wherever, and they want to buy this, and let's say you have it there. I don't know that you would, but so I mean, again, what would they have to pay extra to get this?
Right now, it would be about, I'd say about $250 a rotor in addition to the normal cost of the rotor. And then our pads are pretty much on par, although they're a premium pad, on par with what you would pay for normal pads. So if you're talking about, $250, you're talking about $1,000 a car more than what you would do. But if that's the last set of rotors you put on your car, and you're contributing to zero dust in the environment, and oh, by the way, you replace 6-7 sets of bad rotors, you also capture that CO2.
Yeah, I can see this being very viable right now, but for very specific applications.
Correct.
Performance, or like you said, fleet.
Well, if you look at the sweet spot, the really good place to get the customer is after the OE equipment is worn out, your first change of brakes, right? That's really the optimal place. I mean, you're not going to change them when you first buy a car. You're certainly not going to change them when you lease a car. But if you're a operator of a fleet of 400 vehicles and you've got guys that are just abusing the equipment, like we had one company we're dealing with right now that has E350 vans, and they've got telemetrics, and it said our guys are driving 105 miles an hour with 6,000 pounds loading, and they got to stop fast. They're not stopping fast, right? So they're getting those brakes hot, and they're abusing them, and they're wearing them out fast. Yeah. So we see that happening on a regular basis. We had one fleet operator says, one day down for me is $1,500. So your brake costs are irrelevant to me keeping my vehicle up and running. Yeah. So we haven't even calculated uptime. Mm-hmm. We've just calculated replacement parts parity.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Alan, let's get you into the conversation.
Sure.
I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you were at the Center for Automotive Research, but a lot of change has gone on there. Bring us up to speed in a minute here. What changes have gone on at the Center for Automotive Research?
Sure, would be happy to tell you. At CAR, we're launching what we're calling, we have a new platform, and we're calling it CAR 2.0. And so CAR 2.0 is powered by auto industry executives that we've known in the industry that we brought into the fold at the Center for Automotive Research. And these are executives with deep experience in designing, developing, launching, and even fixing cars. So these are people that really understand the nuts and bolts of product development and production in the automotive industry. And coupled with our industry analysts, we have a really powerful combination at CAR. So CAR 2.0 has some really strong technical prowess, and I would put them up against any other organization out there that's going to do research in that particular space. I think there's a lot of uncertainty into what's happening in the auto industry. And with CAR 2.0, we can not only provide the what, but also the so what in terms of what's happening in the auto industry. So I think we can provide maybe a little clarity in what's happening and what may happen in the future in the auto industry with CAR 2.0.
So to use your so what, who comes to you and what would it be that you would deliver to them? So, what would be supplier, OEM, who, and what's the deliverable?
We have a broad range of clients, and in some cases, it is the OEM or the tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers. And in the case of the OEM, it may be an economic analysis. So, what is the economic impact of an OEM placing a new plant in a particular state? And so, what does that mean in terms of jobs? How many McDonald's pop up? What happens with the community colleges? Is there labor? What happens to the tax base? So we're able to do that economic analysis for an OEM, and many times they'll place it in their annual report. But we have other constituents which can be large and small. So, for example, the city of Sterling Heights or Macomb County would also look at some of our research to see what's happening in their county in terms of risk assessment. So, which plants in a particular county have EVs assigned to them and which plants do not. And so one could look at that and say, well, perhaps this plant is at risk because there is not a future car assigned to that particular plant. And so the community, the county or the municipality could look at that and say, okay, we need to do training, we need to talk to the state about incentives, or we need to engage the OEM to see how we can enhance that. And there's some other areas too, like we do research for Capitol Hill and also the White House. And even in the last 6 months, we've provided some research that was used on the Hill and has been made available to the White House to help inform some of the thinkers in terms of policy. And so in our small way, we're a small organization, but in certain ways, we're able to influence some of the policy that affects the auto industry.
CAR also organizes a big conference every year, the Management Briefing Seminars. It's just weeks away from this show. What are you doing this year with MBS?
It is weeks away. Thank you, John, for bringing that up. So MBS Management Briefing Seminar, we're in year 59 of this event. And so it was way back out of the University of Michigan, in the late 60s, early 70s is when it was really spawned. But it's a venerable event, well known in the industry. It's a 4-day event, August 5th through the 3.5-day event, August 5th through 8th. It's in Traverse City, Michigan, at the Grand Traverse Resort. And it's primarily for decision makers in the auto industry. So we bring in C-suite executives to talk about what are the things that are keeping CEOs up at night. And so this is a little bit different than maybe SAE World Congress. We're not talking about technical sessions with engineers. We're really talking about what are the big problems facing the industry. And we have a lineup that's going to knock your socks off. And so we have speakers from OEMs. For example, one of our keynote speakers is Mark Royce, the president of General Motors, will be one of our keynotes. Joe Hinrichs, so the former COO of Ford Motor Company, who's now the CEO of CSX, will be one of our keynotes. And we have some other speakers as well. Alan Swan, who's the president of Panasonic North America, will be a keynote. And Bob Lee, who's the president of LG Battery Systems North America as well. So, we have players that are right in the center of this ICE to EV transition or ICE to hybrid to EV transition. And we want to hear their thoughts about what's keeping them up at night and what are they worried about. But we also have a number of speakers from Toyota and Honda and Ford and the supply base as well. So it's, again, we have a terrific lineup of speakers. So come up to MBS and network and learn about what's happening in the auto industry.
Hey, I want to get into this whole thing. Where's this industry going? What keeps these CEOs up at night? But let's take a quick commercial break. Give a shout out to our sponsor, Bridgestone, and then come back. And Gordon, you can weigh in on this too. Sure. You guys got a lot of automotive experience. But first, Bridgestone.
Keeping your heart racing in and out of the gym. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Potenza Sport AS tires with a 50,000-mile limited warranty.
We're down at.
Okay, we are back.
All right, before we lose this,
Yeah.
so he mentioned EVs a lot there. Gordon, what does this do to your business, EVs?
Actually, it doesn't really affect us. EVs and ICE vehicles need brakes. Hybrids need brakes. The one thing that I think is beneficial on EVs is that with the larger battery packs, you still need to spec larger rotors. So you have a lot more unsprung mass. and you have a lot more rotational mass that's
Is
happening.
that right? Even with regenerative braking, you need bigger brakes.
You need
on EVs?
bigger brakes for emergency situations because of the energy. If you really got to slam on the brakes with regenerative braking on regular driving, I think you're not really engaging the brakes. But if you have to, you need more braking surface. I think you always have to engineer to the extreme, right? What are you going to do? But from our perspective, the other thing is that the rotors, typical rotor thought process is they stand out there. You walk out and you see your rotors, they rust, right? When they sit in the wet weather. Typically, they're engineered so that you apply your brakes the first time, it kind of wipes that rust off. One of the nice thing about our transfer layer is it doesn't rust, so it doesn't occur that way. Therefore, we also don't get any of that rust wear scenario.
There's a beauty aspect to
There's
what
a
you're
beauty,
doing.
yes. There's a beauty aspect. If you go out and look at our rotors, whether it's 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles, 100,000 miles, you still see the Blanchard grind marks that were created when you first machined the rotor through our transfer layer. So there is a beauty aspect, but to prove our point, we also do logos on the surface because they don't go anywhere.
Oh my God!
So I have some images I can show you. We went to the brake colloquium, the SA show 2 years ago with a car that had a Firebird logo on a car that we did. I drove it and I had 7,000 miles on them. We put it up, we put the light on it. A couple engineers said, that's really cool that you printed that on the rotor, but how do you keep it from abrading when you take it on and off the trailer? I said, I drove that here. And they're going, there's no way you drove that here. So with EVs, back to your question, we feel that once you create a transfer layer, once you have some of the protective things that you still have to, protect the rest of the rotor with some coating treatment, we don't have the rust cycle. And if you look at some of the EVs out there, there's some issues with that. And now there's other solutions out there that are lower cost, but they may wear out over time. One of the things that's unique about our treatment is that our treatment has the same coefficient of expansion and contraction as cast iron, therefore it doesn't crack. So you don't see this like with tungsten oxides and other things where, with that expansion contraction, they crack and flake. So we have some unique attributes that would work both on EVs and on regular cars, ICE cars, hybrids. I don't think the adoption rate on EVs will be as high because you're adding an expensive brake option on top of an expensive brake option.
Unless you can take mass out at the corners.
And again, theoretically, we think we can do it. Have we done it yet and proved it and done it on dyno testing? No.
That's one of the problems with EV. EVs are heavy.
They are heavy.
And they can be as much as 1,000 kilograms heavier than their ICE counterpart.
Exactly.
And so automakers are looking for ways to take weight out. Mm-hmm. And they're primarily looking at battery packs. Can they increase energy density and create smaller battery packs? But weight begets weight. And if you can take it out, you're going to create smaller chassis bits and so on.
Alan, is this one of the things you're finding, as you're putting together the conference, that there is interest in materials, that people are interested in ways and means of lightweighting vehicles?
Very much. There are two things that haven't gone away in this transition from ICE to hybrid to EVs. One of them is safety, and the other one is lightweighting or weight. And whether it was reducing weight to improve fuel economy in the kind of old days, or it's reducing weight to improve range, it's a big deal now, especially with the EVs being heavier. And of course, the safety aspect. So anytime I add weight to the vehicle, the impact characteristics change. So I have to add ultra strength steel to the front end, which adds more weight as well. So lots of inquiries into, are there alternative materials that I can use to reduce weight? It's a big factor.
Yeah, and adding onto that one, if you look at, and I'm going to throw a couple ifs out here, assuming we can go to the minimum and assuming we can handle the heat and assuming we can do these things, which we will do. I mean, we're going to spend the money to do it. If you take that kind of unsprung mass out of a EV, which is just trying to find ways to lose weight, you can also, with unsprung mass and also rotational mass, you can overcome momentum a lot easier, so you can actually extend range with lighter weight on the corners. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of the things that we feel that we could probably add to once we get into our research program to do that.
Let's go back to what you were saying, though, earlier, Alan, of what's keeping these CEOs of these OEMs awake at night. Right now, it is the price war in China spreading throughout the world. We have not seen Chinese automakers come into the U.S., but there are right now 29 Chinese suppliers setting up shop in Mexico, that their capacity is not just going to be for Mexico. And I got to believe that OEM CEOs are wondering, do we have to do business with these guys because they've got such a cost advantage? And conversely, I got to believe that there's supplier CEOs who are desperately worried that they're going to lose a lot of business. How do you see this going?
It is very complex. And you can look to Europe to get a preview of what's happening. So Europe has imposed now tariffs on EV sales, but also EV components. And there are some European manufacturers that are challenging the tariffs on EV components because many of their components, including engines, are manufactured in China. So it actually affects their cost basis as well. So
I think they're
there's a
also
bit of a
worried
dilemma.
about, the Chinese retaliating against, you're talking
That's
the
right.
German manufacturers,
That's
really.
right.
I mean, they're
That's
the
right.
ones, because they've got so much business in China.
That's right.
They're caught between a rock and a hard place,
That's
at
right.
least in Europe right now.
That's right. So the U.S. isn't faced with that at present. However, China does supply a significant number of components to U.S.-based or North American-based automakers. And so that is a bit of a dilemma. And I think the U.S. government is probably going to be looking at that very closely in terms of policy, whether they are Chinese components or they're Chinese EVs. Presently, there's 100% tariff on Chinese EVs imported to the U.S., and we're not seeing any significant EVs at present. By the way, we will have a Chinese EV at MBS, so come on up and take a look at it. Be careful. But yeah, that's a dilemma, and I think really the two things that are keeping CEOs up at night is how do you make EVs affordable? Okay, so
I think they're first worrying about how do you make them profitable.
and the second one is the profitability. Well, it's interesting too. If you believe in man-made CO2 contributing to climate change, and if you believe that, that's really the premise for EVs. And vehicles are 25% of man-made CO2 emissions. So if you believe that premise, EVs,
I'll challenge you on that, but keep going.
if you believe the premise, EVs only help if you have democratization of EVs. It does not help for CO2 emissions if only the affluent drive EVs. And so for this to work, you need democratization of EVs. They need to be affordable. And presently, the average transaction price of ICE vehicles are $47,000. The average transaction price of EVs is about $54,000. And so $47,000 may be too expensive to begin with. $54,000 is seen to be even more expensive. So CEOs are looking at how do I bring that price point down so I get to democratization. Certainly, they want to be in the game for the long haul. So how do you make it sustainable and make it profitable? But
have you found that it takes a long time to plan a conference, and you know better than I do for having done these, and I got to wonder, aren't CEOs concerned about the fact that there seems to be comparatively low market demand for EVs while there is growing market demand for PHEVs and hybrids?
Well, I think you've seen that shift over the past 8 months or so. And you had the Toyota strategy, and approximately 25% of Toyota's portfolio was hybrid or hybrid electrics. And you look at the Detroit 3, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, it was a much smaller wedge of the pie. And this is back in Q4 of 2023. Well, you've seen a shift, and General Motors is now bringing hybrids back into the game, and
or so they say.
Soon we expect to see some GM hybrids. Ford is shifting their portfolio to show more hybrids, and Honda is also in that game as well. So what you've seen, what good companies do is they're going to match demand with supply, and the demand right now is a little bit lower on the EVs and a little bit higher on the HEV on the plug-in hybrids and hybrid electrics, and so they're simply matching that. And so yeah, there's been some consternation. There's been a little bit of pullback in investment or reallocation of investment. I don't see it being scrapped entirely. I think most automakers think the end game, at least for the midterm, is going to be some type of EV, that a hybrid is going to be a transition. So I think they still see a future with EVs. It's just going to take a little bit longer, is their view.
Gordon, what do you think? This this price war that started in China, started by Tesla, by the way, too, is showing no signs of slowing down in China. And you got to believe this is going to spread to the rest of the world. I do.
I would agree. I worked at PNGV and I worked on alternative propulsion back in the 90s. And back then we did some of the crazy stuff, through the road hybrids, stuff like that. And even back then when we started looking at, viability of not only infrastructure. So if you look at all of the aspects tied to an adoption of EVs in any high volume, cost is definitely one of them, but also availability of charging, fueling or charging infrastructure and these other things. When I was at KPMG and when I was at B. Riley, we did some of these seminars. We started talking about batteries. And when you look at batteries in particular, the technology is not really there where I believe it's still, and we all play in this, a scalable business. And this war that's happening is because I think there's overproduction, overcapacity. And so you got to get rid of it. At some point, you got to lower the price to a level where you can. Otherwise, it sits and rots in a field. And so, if you look at some of the things, we've seen some pictures in China where there's fields and fields of electric vehicles out there that are still not purchased. And
I think that's misleading. That picture's been around and gotten a lot of attention. There was a scheme going back about 4 years ago in China for ride-hailing services, and if you had electric ride-hailing, you could get all kinds of government subsidies. So there was a lot of very smart people who gamed the system, started a ride-hailing service, got all these EVs. The government paid them for the whole thing, and then they walked away from it. So they're because look at what BYD, look at what Li Auto, look at what NIO, Xpeng, and these are damn good EVs. I mean, they're the best in the world.
Again, I believe from the things we studied that we're just not there yet, and the consumer. Even back in the day when I was in product planning, when we looked at vehicles, you still have to plan a product that people want to buy, and they got to be able to afford it, and they got to look at it long term. And I've, again, anecdotally heard from a lot of people that have adopted either a Tesla or other things. They had a good experience, but they're going back to ICE propulsion just for a variety of reasons. And it's all over the map. And we were studying this I did this for 4.5 years at B. Riley when we did these automotive, consulting discussions. And so you really have to kind of hedge your bet on both sides. And I think what Al said earlier is that it's going to take longer. It's probably something that a lot of people said earlier, but they didn't say it out loud. And they just think it's going to take a lot longer to get there. In the meantime, there are a lot of things that we can do to continue to improve the performance of engines. There's a lot of things we can do to improve emissions. There's still a lot of room out there for innovation in ICE. And so I've seen some ICE devices that have been looking for funding, but because the massive flow towards EVs and all the funding and all the devices that are out there went that direction, these guys are still out there looking for funding, but they've got 10, 15, 20% improvements in ICE engines that they can deliver. They can prove it, but nobody wants to invest in it.
There's a part of the equation that is off board from the car is the EV chargers.
Yes.
And quite honestly, you think people are skeptical until they start seeing EV chargers that are plentiful and available. They're going to wonder, is this EV trip going to be a one-way trip, or am I going to be able to get back? And so there's this NEVI program, this $7.5 billion federal program that's been taking effect. And for example, the state of Michigan has allocated $110 million to deploy the EV fast chargers every 50 miles on alternative fuel corridors. It's taken time. They're deploying them. I think the state of Ohio might be a little bit ahead of the game. So if you go on the Ohio Turnpike and you go to one of their fabulous service centers, which are really gorgeous, you'll start seeing these EV chargers are starting to pop up. I think people need to start seeing those to believe it's really going to happen.
Well, what they also need to put out is signage, because, as you know, most of these chargers are invisible to the general public.
Well, that's true.
People who own it,
That's actually written into the law.
that they put up signage. Well, it's about time they start getting the signs up.
Yeah.
Because people who own EVs know there's a lot of charge. It depends where you are in the country. But even right around the studio here, there's ample charging, ample fast charging public. And 4 years ago, that wasn't the case. There was nothing around here. So it's coming way too slow. But I would agree. The infrastructure. Sean, what was the story in Autoline Daily today that we'll have more chargers than gas stations in 8 years? Who said that? Do you remember?
No.
Anyway, there was a study that just came out. We reported it today, but they're saying in 8 years we'll have more fast chargers in the U.S. than gas stations.
Well, you'll need to, because you do the math. How long does it take you to fill a car up? How long does it take you to charge a battery?
Yeah, no.
So even a fast charger, 20 minutes versus 5 minutes for full tank
do the
of
math.
gas.
Except that most everybody can charge at home. That's got an EV today.
That's
so
true.
And you can't do that with your gasoline car.
That's true.
Because you don't need to.
Well, you can't.
There was a recent study showing the average time it takes people to fill up their gasoline tank. And so, of course, when you and I just run to the corner station, it's only 4 or 5 minutes. But if we're driving from Michigan to Florida, that stop is invariably longer because we go in and we get donuts and we go to the restroom. So the average time when you average it all together is about 26 minutes, which is not far from that EV DC fast charging time. And so there's special cases, of course, but that charging time is getting down, and there's some innovation in that particular space. And if batteries get smaller, that 30-minute time gets smaller, gets shorter as well.
I got to ask you, are you one of those guys who leaves your car at the pump?
The pump, that's what I was going to ask.
I
When you
try
go
not.
in-
Well, my wife and I travel together, so usually we'll, I mean,
Well, I
she'll
think
go
to-
in and I'll do the
yeah.
pump, and then we'll move the car. Is what we try to do.
To your point, it's the utility, right? So if you gas and then park and then use the store, then somebody else can use it,
Right.
But if not, then you have to have more places. The story so we moved our company from San Diego, right? And of course, California is very heavily into infrastructure, trying to get this whole EV switch over. But their power grid, PG&E, goes down on a regular basis, particularly if there's any kind of fire out there or so forth. And then you get the lineup of the EVs trying to figure out where they can go to try and get a charging structure. And they're limited. And you may have, to your point, 50 cars lined up to do 20, 30 minutes worth of charging. How long does that take? Do the math, right? Those people are going to be, it's like sleeping out for concert tickets to get your car charged. Not many people want to do that.
Yeah.
And so, we need many more of these filling stations, but it's a multiple. Great if we have more than the filling stations we have. We probably need 8 times that, given the charge time that we have.
But you're right. The home charging is a nice solution.
Yeah.
Works well for people that have homes and garages. For people in apartment complexes, it's a little
That's
bit
a
more
different
challenging.
story. That's right. Changing topics right now, but the same theme of what's keeping CEOs awake at night. This cyber attack on the company CDK that does dealer management systems. I mean, holy crap. This had a real impact on sales last month. Definitely a financial impact to every single dealership that uses CDK stuff. Is cybersecurity part of the conference, or what do you think about this whole cyber attack? And apparently CDK paid the hackers $25 million in Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's almost a tragedy. And in fact, some of the dealers had to go back to paper and pencil systems to execute the sale. We do have a session on cybersecurity at MBS, and it just shows you that cybersecurity is not going to be a one and done and it's fixed. It's in product, it's in the services, whether it's your credit card, it's your home internet, it's on EV chargers, the EV charging network, it's on the cars themselves, it's on the back office system. So it's going to be a continual fight, and you always have the bad guys. They keep changing, and so the white hats are going to have to keep changing. So it's an ever-evolving process, but it's not something that's going to be fixed and we're done with it. It's going to continue over time. Hopefully the industry gets better at it. But yeah, I mean, these things are tragedies, especially when they affect healthcare, the medical industry. I mean,
Hospitals getting shut down.
yes,
from
I mean,
cyber
it's really a
attacks, right?
tragedy. But we do have the Deputy Director of Cybersecurity will be speaking at our conference, and so that's one of our sessions that we plan to have up at MBS.
What you mentioned environment before. Are you focusing on that in any way? Environment
and sustainability. So we have 3 areas of research, and the first is energy and sustainability, technology, and the third is labor, economics, and policy. So the energy and sustainability captures batteries, so EV batteries really under the energy portion, but the sustainability could be the circularity of the batteries, but it could also be sustainability in manufacturing processes. And so the premise was kind of interesting with batteries is the notion of being a national security issue is once I get lithium into the country, if it has to be imported, I keep it in the country because I simply do this recycling. And so I reduce my dependence on foreign sources. I keep it in the country. It helps the environment in terms of the circularity of it. So that is actually one of our sessions as well up at MBS. But we've done some white papers on circularity, and the demand for battery recycling is a little bit low right now, of course, because there aren't that many EV batteries out there. But these hubs are starting to pop up. There's one in South Carolina, there are some in California, and there's a few more that are going to be building.
Right here, down the road, we've got Cerba in, what is it? Wixom, I guess it is.
Wixom, and I think they also have something in Ohio as
Right.
well. But it's fabulous, and you really want these things to be fairly close to the R&D centers. Is anything you learn from recycling, you can quickly feed back to the R&D center to say, if you make this little change, I've positively affected the ability to recycle, and I can reduce waste or improve the efficiency. So, yeah, I mean, it's a terrific topic. You're going to see a lot more growth in that area. It's a little bit slow right now.
So, Gordon, what do you think? This going back to the cyber attack thing.
Well, I've got a little bit of a personal investment in cybersecurity. My son is in the Air Force doing cybersecurity for the government, and so we hear a little bit about things. One of the things that I can tell you that in running my company, it's not one type of cyber attack. It's a variety of different types. We had one that was very sophisticated. That fortunately we have set up in our company some personal stopgaps that allow us to check certain activities, particularly when it comes to cash in and cash out. So we had a situation where I was driving down to Indianapolis. Somebody had hacked into our email account, figured out who was responsible for paying bills and authorizing payments, sent an email from me to my CFO to pay a personal $75,000 bill. Now, we never do that. We also have a discussion every Thursday that says, even if I told you to pay it, we're still discussing it on Thursday. So we have this roster that takes anything that's over a certain amount and does it. This was very sophisticated, went in through our Microsoft software, set up different parameters within our email so that we weren't communicating. I didn't even see these emails. I just got a phone call on the road saying, why are you sending these to me? And so we had to shut that down. We had to set up a variety of other new security patches. And that is just one example. We get on a regular basis people saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, like one of my employees, we need to change where my account is being paid. These are small phishing exercises, but it's a daily vigilance within our group and training to make sure everybody understands who's on first, what's going on, what does it look like. If it looks like this, it's probably something bad, and let's try and eradicate it. And so it's a daily struggle. We've been very fortunate. I mean, knock wood. I don't know to see anyone around here, but we've been extremely fortunate so far, and we do manage our cash flow a bit old school, albeit, and it does slow things down a little bit, but it has been a lot safer.
Mm-hmm.
Let me change this up a little bit. We've got you two guys here. You've got plenty of experience in the auto industry. Give us a sense of what competition was like when you started in the industry and where you see competition today.
It's a great question. You want to start?
I'd be happy to. So I came out of the University of Michigan in 1985. And during that time, so I started at Chrysler, and we were down in Highland Park at that time. And there really wasn't much camouflage on vehicles that I recall. And the product life cycle, so it was about 60 months. It was about 5 years to develop a car. And I grew up in Dearborn, and so I could see the Ford development cars would drive around the city. on occasion, and there was no camouflage on those cars either. And it was a time where we'll show you our car because it takes you 5 years to catch up and, to mimic it, so it doesn't really matter. So fast forward through various incarnations of Chrysler and Daimler Chrysler and Fiat Chrysler Automotive, and then I never made it to Stellantis, but almost. And that product life cycle got down to nearly 20 to 24 months. And so, of course, it depends on where you snap the truck line. This is a top hat, but it got to the point where we had to camouflage things because companies could react very quickly with, digitization and the ability to go with a CAD model very quickly to tooling, and so that whole thing had changed. And our friend Jim Dunn made a career
Spy
out of
photographer.
spy photography out at the Chelsea Proving Grounds and at Dearborn Proving Grounds and others by taking those photos. And and internally there were more than a few tongue lashings about why that instrument panel wasn't covered up when he went inside to go to McDonald's to grab lunch. And Gordon will remember that as well. So just the speed, going from 5 years down to less than 2 years in product development, and it's going to get shorter as well. That was my kind of recollection.
So I graduated from U of M. I didn't know you were at U of M, but go blue. 1983, I graduated, and I started prior to that as an intern at Pontiac Motor Division. So my father was a Pontiac guy for 40 years. He worked for John DeLorean back in the 60s, and I grew up racing on Woodward with development cars, with my dad asking me to take vacuum gauge measurements at certain shift speeds. And in those days, it was very exciting because it was all about speed and chrome and style. And I remember very explicitly when I was a kid that everything kind of hit the wall literally in 1973 during the oil embargo, when my dad said we had to change from front engine rear wheel drive to, basically unibody, transverse mounted four bangers to, boxy exteriors, and style was really kind of falling apart. And then you ended up with the GM combination. And right about 1983, when I came out, I had this wonderful experience. Hulki Aldekushti was doing the Fiero, and I was on the Fiero program in 1980 as a engineering intern and at Pontiac Motor Division on probably one of the last kind of really innovative cars that Pontiac ever did that I thought was really cool. And so there was a lot of that kind of excitement in that. And when I went and I graduated from engineering, I ended up at American Motors, which was owned by Renault at the time. And I got to work on everything from the drivetrain back, right? So I had the flywheels back through the axles, and Jeeps were cool, right? And then we were doing a lot of really kind of neat off-road things with those Jeeps. And then Renault had this little thing called the Alpine that they were doing for the US market. So there were some cool cars. I was a bit fortunate that all the way through my career at Chrysler, I got to do some fun things. So I got to work on Viper and then Prowler, and a la Jim Dunn, we built the Pranglers really to do aerothermal. And when they photographed that, Raz and I were laughing our butts off because the Pranglers were obviously out there for testing. But
so explain what a Prangler is.
So the long and the short of it, we were sitting there going, well, we have to do aerothermal testing early. We didn't have full bodies. So we made up we determined, let's go take some junk Jeep Wrangler bodies that were over at the old Jeep truck building, and we'll put those and modify those, and then we'll make our own kind of front end that would mimic the front end of the Prowler with its kind of weird plan view. And then they went out and they tested them on the proving loop at CTC. And, again, I think it was Jim Dunn, I don't remember, but it was some of the photographers caught the Prangler on the track and go, what the heck is this, right? We made a few of them, and they kind of were called, I guess, affectionately the Prangler, right? Because it was a Wrangler rear and a Prowler front. But I remember building those cars in the labs down below at CTC, and it was just, really kind of fun because we were doing whatever we had to, like hot rodders, beg, borrow, steal, put it together, and see if we can make it work. And those days were fun. I think it got more of a business as it got on. More and more, you had more regulation. You had more things you had to do, not that you wanted to do, but you had to do, right? And then you had to try and price them. You had to make it affordable, and you had to make a market. It became more difficult to have fun making cars.
We had a colleague. We used to entertain people from different industries who would come in and do some kind of knowledge sharing and benchmarking and such. And we had an industry vet from the computer industry, and one of their products was a commercially available tax program. And so their product was on a disk that they would send out to people. And so as part of our benchmarking, we brought him into the pilot plant at CTC in Auburn Hills. And we started out at the front end where we had big coils of sheet metal, and we showed him the stamping, and we walked around the process, and they were, forming the body in white, and then, putting the interiors in, eventually the powertrain, and then the painted. And at the end of the line was a car. And he was just absolutely amazed.
Yeah.
His product was a 3.5-inch disk drive. And we started with raw material and had a car rolled off the line. And he says, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And, we all kind of walked out a little bit taller and a little bit prouder to say, yeah, this is cool. We see it every day, and we maybe
take it for granted.
Yeah, it hasn't changed,
pretty
right?
cool.
I mean, maybe the propulsion system's different, but fundamentally from the sheet steel to...
Well, the pilot plant was really, I think, a great innovation because we were building, all the pre-pilot cars right there at CTC, and then they would reconfigure it to do the next one. And so for me, that was, when we built CTC and that was being put together, that was really cool because normally you'd run pilots down another assembly line or you'd do it a little offline and then run it through the assembly line. But this was focused and the learnings were invaluable. And that was really cool. So every once in a while you got to walk out of work and say, we do some really cool stuff.
It's interesting what you're saying there, Gordon, because it reminds me of the very earliest days of the automobile. I'm talking, Henry Ford in the Paquette plant, even before they went to Highland Park, but even at Highland Park. In the earliest days, there wasn't really an engineering department as we would recognize it today. You had a master craftsman who led a small team of people, typically 8 people, that would do the whole car.
Right.
And whenever they came up with an innovation of how to do something better or differently, the master craftsman would call a runner and do a quick sketch and hand it to him and says, take it to engineering and make a blueprint out of it. So the innovation and the engineering literally came off the plant floor, not some engineering department that's telling manufacturing, here, make this. So when you were just talking about that pilot program, that kind of goes back to the earliest days.
Well, it goes back to people who were really, I guess, really aligned with cars and how they were made and how they were taken apart. If you remember, GM used to have these master techs that would sit in with the engineers and say, well, that's great that you engineer that, but how are you going to get that bolt out once you assemble that engine in the car and it hits the side rail? I mean, you can't get it out. You can get it out, cut it, and then try and get the rest out. And so you used to have service engineering embedded in with those guys, to your point, saying, not only can I build it and put it in an assembly line, but I can also service it and take it back out when I need to and not spend a ton of money doing it.
Yeah.
Today, I mean, the old joke was, we got to the point now where you put water on the top of the engine, and there's nothing that comes out of the bottom because we've got it so well packaged. That's what CAD did for us, right? Back in the old days, you made models, you put them together. The joke was when I was working on my old overhead cam 6 engine back in the 60s or in the 70s, I could sit on the fender and put my legs in the engine compartment and work on the engine. You can't do that today. It's just we've become so efficient at packaging.
In fact, I want to say, what was the cab forward cars at Chrysler?
LH.
The LH cars.
Yeah.
They packaged the front end so well because of CAD, they were having cooling problems.
Yeah,
there was not enough
airflow.
Air going through the engine compartment. They had to move stuff back out.
Yeah. I mean, there's unintended consequences of being better at what you do.
That's right.
Right.
Hey, look, we're going to have to wrap this up. Really good discussion. Alan Amici from CAR, thank you so much.
Pleasure
Gordon
being here.
Heidacker from PureForge, excellent.
Thanks.
Gary, really good show.
We'll do one next week.
We'll do one next week. So we want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.